Hi, Laurence. How you doing?
Is this like a Diary of a CEO thing?
No.
Okay.
Why did it make you feel that way?
Because I think at the beginning of one podcast, he said, how are you? And the guest treated it as such a profound thing because I think they were just primed for a profound moment.
How are you on your inside?
Can I ask you something? How are you? And they go,
I recently. But no, I like that though.
you know, I was journaling.
But does this mean that we're in podcast beef with him? Because I've just started out and I don't want to.
No, I get it. I also feel it's weird though, because obviously what you need in a podcast is like lower yourself into it.
Yeah.
And the audio needs to feel that way too. So I get it. I actually feel pretty good. I've come off a week of not being great.
Because you've been to men's circles, so you know what this is like. How are you?
Dude, the men's circle is, I say this to my wife once a week. I'm like, I need that thing back.
It's back in 2 weeks.
I need it back.
It's back in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I need it.
I actually want to take it into a neutral space because we obviously do it for members of Soho House, which is like a very elite group of human beings.
And
you.
Sometimes, and me, yeah.
And you get invited. But it's not by design. It was just because they asked and I was like, I'll do it. And then now it's happening. But the demand is like definitely there. So I feel my intuition is to...
The first time I went to it, I remember I came home and I was like a different husband for about a week.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me more.
You just said a few things that I hadn't heard another man say openly in a genuine way and not on a podcast, where I connected with it. I just felt, wow, like you've said something there that really felt... we were speaking about the relationship between parents and your spouse.
Yeah.
And you were saying how there was this thing where you needed to sort of work out whether you challenged your wife or you challenged your mum.
Yeah.
And I just, like, we've, you know, obviously this is a big topic on podcasts because it's a really great thing to clip up and loads of people are like, well, I love my mum. But in real life, when people then talk about it, you can be so much more candid and open. And when you said I challenged one of my parents, that was like a really big, it wasn't something that I needed to hear, but it was just something that I went, oh yeah, like that. You put a few pieces together, shall I put it that way?
Yeah.
And then I was like, yeah, I can say that. That feels all right.
Yeah.
And I got like the permission of it, which felt really good.
Yeah. I think the secondary point to that is your wife will look at you differently when you can protect her from everybody.
100%. Yeah.
That's a different game changer.
And I also think if your wife looks at you differently, then your kids will also look at you differently. And,
it makes your unit solid. I think one of the big things is, if you think about kind of being married, you create your own family and you have to protect that family in a way that maybe you didn't get protected in your own family.
Right. Which is definitely, like, obviously my parents were divorced by about a year older than my son is. So that was something that I never worried, if that makes sense, about divorcing because I was like, oh, I'm just not going to.
You've made it that far.
I've made
You're
it.
You're a year off from
that's
surpassing.
Yeah.
Do you think about those things? Is that actually
about divorce?
Well, divorce, like making it further than your parents made it.
Not in the way where I'm like, oh, you set this marathon, and now I'm going to do an ultra marathon of a marriage. But I do think, and I think a lot of people do think about how much longer they can continue. And I don't know if you get this. A lot of my friends have conversations where they're like, well, I've been married for quite a while now. And they just kind of take it as read that the marriage is working and because you've been married for time. Whereas I feel quite different because my wife is very good at checking me and very good at telling me like that you are bad at this. Yeah. And that's really hard. Yeah. It's become like a really great asset of our marriage that she can just say like, you genuinely just be like, can I swear?
Yeah.
You're shit.
Yeah.
Like you're really shit at this. And that is, that's really, initially it's really painful because you're like, no, you're not meant to talk to me like that. Or like, you're not meant, that's not meant to be what we do. Yeah. And then now we do.
So where does, and maybe you're just pontificating, but where does the idea of like, you're not meant to talk to me like that come from? Like how real is that?
It comes from all the preconceptions that I have as to what a marriage is meant to be. But I realized, when? I think we were married for a little while and there was a honeymoon period in the marriage, even though we'd been together for 10 years. And then after that, it began to get, I think maybe both of us sort of realized, like, oh, we are fully actually saying that we're going to be committed to the other person, and my word has to be good on that. And I think she started to look at me slightly different. I don't want to speak for her, but she began to look at me slightly differently and treat me slightly differently. And in a sense, be like, this can't, whatever habit this is or whatever this thing is, this can move in this direction. If we want to be happy, you're going to have to do this. For me, the marathon analogy really works quite well because I think people think a marathon is one long state of feeling the same while you're running, because a lot of people think of running in that way. Whereas when you get to about mile 15, whatever it is, you're like, okay, I need to sort of take stock of how I actually feel here. And sometimes the idea is, okay, let's push on through this. And sometimes the idea is like, let's take a bit of a breather. And I definitely feel that way, is like ebbs and flows to it that works for me.
So is there a tiny part of you that's got what happened for your mum and dad in your head?
I felt like I totally got it. And I feel like I get it even more now I'm married. But I got it from a young age anyway, I think. I got why they were not together. But that was really helpful because they didn't ever... when some people get... I don't know, maybe divorced people, you never look at them... When someone says, I'm getting a divorce, you never look at them and go, but you're meant to be together.
Normally it's like, yeah, could you? It'd be great.
It would be really convenient for our dinners. But like, that's where... I looked at my mum and dad and I went, of course. Even at a young age, you look at
where were you at this time? Because I'm always surprised that you're not actually from London, because you feel very London. Not only just in tone, but energy.
I've definitely, my wife would call me a bit of a beg, a bit thirsty to be a London person, she often says. And she reminds me so regularly.
I didn't want to say it though, Laurence. I was trying to avoid calling you names, but like...
She does that. She's like, you so want to be London and you're so northern and you're not. From Burton. Well, I lived in Burton.
Contextualize Burton, because like if you're someone like me who goes past Watford and has to call my mum and be like, Mum, I'm out of town, just in case.
And she's like, where? Which bit?
I'm like, I've gone to Manchester just in case I go missing.
Yeah, right. Yeah. He was on Canal Street last I saw, right?
Wow.
But yeah, it's a really, actually, I've stayed in hotels on Canal Street. Really lovely hotels, like really great hotels.
You know what you did.
The vibe for me, I was a bit like, okay, you guys are going out to different bars.
No, you know what you did. Tell us about Burton. What's the context of Burton?
Small town, very, very racially segregated.
Like, how and what races are we talking?
We're talking Pakistani, Indian, and white mostly. Okay. And
is it a factory town? Is it like an industrial town?
Do you know it's the place in the world where, do you know the triangle, like the red triangle that's on the side of all the pubs down here? Yeah. That's where that red triangle comes from. I think it was the first trademark in the world.
That's a really interesting random fact.
Right. And the water there was good, so it made good beer. And now it makes crawls, but who cares? Like so what happened there was the town was very segregated. But as a kid, I didn't know that. So I remember the first time that I like crossed the boundary of the segregation, I got chased through the streets by a bunch of kids.
Really?
And
are we talking South Asian children?
Yeah.
Wow.
And obviously I don't know, I didn't stop and specifically ask them where they're from, but they looked South Asian.
Yeah.
And I remember just being like, wow, I'm in danger here. And I'd never felt that way before in my town.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So I have a story. I was raised in Hoxton N1. In the 90s in Hoxton N1, it was National Front. They had an office in Murray Grove, like an area where you just couldn't walk.
Could you just pop in and sort of say hi? Yeah. Hey, it's a drop-in centre for the National Front.
As a child of Jamaican descendants, I'd like to welcome you.
So that's such a great sketch, by the way, if someone does that.
So I remember going to school and like I used to go to school Murray Grove and I lived in De Beauvoir, so it's 15-minute, 20-minute walk.
You lived in De Beauvoir?
Yeah.
You know, if you live in De Beauvoir now, that's like you're sitting with
the
like
houses are like 3 million whatever plus.
No joke, bro. I walk past those once a day in Manifest.
Just
living in
touch
one
the
of those.
brick and just be like, ha, ha.
I do. I'm like, the texture on this. That's Louis Vuitton.
So I remember walking to school and going on a Saturday to meet my friends from school. And, you know, this is the day before the phones and internet. So you went to someone's house. If they weren't there, you just went home. Yeah. There's nowhere else to find them.
I love those days.
Listen, the reliability you had to have. Meet me by the phone box at midday. And if you just weren't there, you waited for a bit. Yeah. Up to maybe half an hour.
I realized the other day that my good friend of childhood was really he's a great kid. He was really just a good friend because I could look out the front window of my house and see if he was in.
There, yeah.
And that was why he was a good friend, because the other friends would take more effort to work out if they were in or not.
And the second you had to make an effort for that friend, you was like, I don't need to call him as much as I did.
Not as much as I did. Yeah.
So I had a very similar experience in reverse, and I was chased by a group of white men in like Burberry, Reebok workout, Lee jeans, so I have that visual of that particular archetype of person, and I always get triggered every time I see someone, especially if it's a group. And it kind of shifted me. So when I look at the work I do now, a lot of it has come from these types of experiences. What did that do for you to be chased? And the first time you're probably thinking the world isn't quite safe.
Do you know what? It changed pretty quick, because that was the age of 15. And then the age of 16, I went to a school that was like the school in town where it was a mixture of two different, the two groups, essentially. And very quick, I made friends with a lot of South Asian people. And I'd never really had South Asian people as friends. I had like one South Asian friend before. And I remember he moved back to India. And so it was like, well, he's gone. And
my one friend is gone.
And he was a lovely kid, and he was like one of my best friends as a kid, my second, maybe our third best friends.
I love that. I remember the scale.
I've got one. I've got one friend we're friends with for 30 years, and we're still friends now. He's still my best friend. I could text him anything, and he would understand it in context. Even if I said just one word, he'd know what's going on. It's weird, but anyway. So, and then I went to this school, and I just it was like such a humanizing experience, because I was one of the white kids that was nice, and they were the South Asian kids that were nice, and we were all just mixing. And then every now and again, the racist kid would come in or whatever, and because I wasn't that scared of that race, I just make fun of him. And so when I left, they gave me a certificate that said, "You're the racist OG," and it was like, "You're the guy who that's cool." And so I got like celebrated for not being racist, or for like openly not being racist, which I guess is like, you're supposed to. Yeah. But like that, and so I made loads of friends.
Do you feel like that changes your course in life then? Like once you've, because I think there's always moments that when someone gives you a ticket to say you're definitely not racist, that becomes a part of your like winning formula. Like, I'm definitely not racist.
Made me
rather
too
than just I'm just not racist.
But it made me too comfortable in that sense, to the point where like I think, does every white guy go through that thing where they kind of have to have a conversation with a black guy where they're like, so, I just need you to know, like, I'm not, I've kind of thought about this and I don't think I'm racist. So, and I'm not sure always how his black friend has to respond, whether the guy has to be like, and how many conversations that specific black person who's had this conversation has had with multiple white guys who don't want to be racist. Yeah. So I think, to an extent, coming from that small town, there was one black kid in our whole school. I knew that was obviously a weird, or like not a culturally diverse experience. But I was, I knew you kind of have to go through some of these other moments to get to where you're trying to get. Yeah. But if I'm honest, I don't know where I was trying to get to. What was I trying to do? Was I trying to prove I wasn't racist? It never really struck me as a thing. That was more of like a side quest, if that makes sense. And that's what I think is interesting about
But they always say like a winning formula is something that gives you a payoff, and it kind of is buried quite deep down. And it's like, imagine you don't get much attention for life or anything, and then someone says, here's a certificate for being this person. You're right. Then you're just like, I'm always going to be this person underneath.
Oh, no, it definitely did that. Yeah. But it also, that to an extent, it maybe made me more blind to the places where I was not as understanding, or whatever that word would be. Yeah. And definitely like living with my wife, who's from Kosovo, but they have very different customs. She's Muslim, I'm not. And when you have kids, then you begin to go, well, where's the, what do we tell them? What do we tell them about God? What do we tell them about what dad believes about God? What do we tell them about what's clean? Because clean to an English person is different to clean to a like a Kosovan person. And obviously I'm not saying therefore like live in squalor, but and so there's a lot of conversations around that where you sort of go, like, am I clean? Like, or am I like, and that's where I recognize my blind spots. Yeah. But I don't know how to fix them always. Yeah. Sometimes, because also my response is not always, my response is also, your way is not the only other way to do it. So why are we choosing your way over mine? You know what it's like when you're in a relationship, and there's maybe an element of like, no, it should be my way, no, it should be yours. And like, you negotiate.
But are you someone that naturally just challenges?
I challenge
whatever's presented. Yeah. Just because there may be something else, or because you genuinely believe there's something else. Do you have the answer in advance? or are you just being like almost contrarian? Like, is that a part of it?
I'm definitely a contrarian, but maybe not to a degree where I'm just doing it for the sake of that. Like, I feel like there's a good for that comes from asking the question.
Yeah.
And not even, it doesn't even have to be like a profound question. It's be like, why are you chopping the tomatoes like that? Or like, why are you doing it like this? It's also partly, and you know this as well from working in the media or from working in whatever, your mind sets up in that way after a little while. So you kind of need to, like, all my day is spent going, what's my angle on that? What's my angle on that? And so to an extent, I kind of need to get home and not do that.
Yeah.
But it feels like, if I was to summarize my personality, that's a big part of my personality.
Yeah.
I think it makes me difficult to hang out with sometimes.
Yeah.
And you'll know I'm really relaxed when actually I'm not really doing that.
Yeah.
Because
so what is happening for you then? Because then almost like the idea of being a contrarian is to never necessarily commit to an idea. Like, it's normally connected to like a fear.
Mm-hmm.
I fear that if I double down on this idea and I side with you and it goes wrong, what does that mean for me?
Mm-hmm.
So otherwise, there's no other reason to be a contrarian. So what is happening for you when you're, I'm saying we should shoot it this way, and you're like, oh, have you thought about, why not just be, yes, great, let's shoot?
Because sometimes I'm a real believer in the anti-environment. So like, I really love that. I love Marshall McLuhan, the social theorist, and he says like, and actually it's you can pick holes in this thing, but like the one thing that a fish knows nothing about is water. That's where I'm thinking the contrarianism comes from, because I think the fish doesn't necessarily know about its own environment. You can't always be aware of the impact of the decisions that you're making now, which may down the line do that. So how well can you kind of mitigate or make a good decision in that moment that will pay off later or will turn out to be a good decision? That is what contrarianism is to me, because I don't think it's not. Some people think contrarianism is for the sake of being contrarian, and for me it's actually for the sake of, well, actually, why is it that way? Is it just that we always say it is that way? And that's where the clashes mostly come in my marriage and in most of my friendships. Is like, why do you do it like that? Like, why are we, why do you pray in that way? And I'm not saying like you should pray my way, because I don't have a way, but why do you pray? Or why is this specific word said like this? Or like, why is homophobia like implicitly wrapped up in some people's idea of religion, or racism implicitly wrapped up in some people's idea of their identity? Like, why is that way? Yeah.
And does that work for you though? And when I say work, what I mean is, do you wake up in the morning being like, I look forward to today because if I present this in this particular space, I'm going to produce some amazing work. And then do you go to bed thinking, do you know what, today, because of my contribution, we improved something? Or does it kind of rattle around as a bit of like, I probably didn't need to do that today?
It depends on, do you know, the thing about being contrarian is sometimes you can't realize you've asked the wrong question until you've asked the question. So like, there has to be a willingness to upset people maybe with it. And do you know what I realized not long ago was I was actually like a complicit contrarian, where I was asking questions that felt like they were counter to what people were saying, but were actually just kind of helping someone make the point. And that was actually like, that's not contrarian. That's just like, I don't know what that is. But it's not a good place to be, because you're actually just people pleasing. And I'm a terrible people pleaser because my parents were divorced.
Did you just try to create a loop connection between your parents' divorce?
No, I just know it is. I just know that's how it is. Where else does my people pleasing come from? If you're alone with your parents for a while, and especially that's what's weird about it, no one ever calls this out. If you're alone, it's not about if you're, you have a mum who's on their own or a dad who's on their own. If you're alone with that mum on their own and alone with that dad on their own for a while, there are times where you just look at them and they're in their thoughts because they're a divorced parent and they're thinking, I should be on a date with someone right now, or like, and their life is going on, and you're just sort of going, still here. We still need to go to the cinema if that's all right. And then just they're going, need to buy beans. And like, and so your people pleasing sort of comes from reading that and going, should I lighten the mood a bit here, guys? Should I rap and lift the mood? Like,
hold on, are you an only child then?
Yeah, of course. Look at me. I had a stepbrother, but that's not the same.
It's not the same. Because I think the relationship you have with your parents, you don't share that with anybody.
No.
And I think that's hard, because I think for me, and I'm one of four, I'm third in line, and it's like we get to talk to each other about the reality of how we were parented, and sometimes we can give a perspective that we didn't think about. I was actually saying this yesterday. I had some friends over for dinner, and I was telling this story of like, you know, when you do a therapy session and then you trigger yourself in a way, like you go back to a memory and now you're like, this is really heavy. And before I just lived with my heaviness, I just rang my sister and I was like, what was happening around about these times? And then she just spoke for about 25 minutes about what her version of the reality was. But my mum was so worried about me that she didn't eat for like a week. Wow. I was like, what? What do you mean she didn't eat for a week? She's like, yeah, she was so worried because you were just going outside and we didn't know what you were getting up to. Like one time I basically got arrested under mistaken identity. But when you're 16 and you come back and be like, oh, so I've been arrested and I've been in the cell since, 3 o'clock in the afternoon and now it's 1 a.m. and that's where I've been. You can't really explain to your parents that it's a mistaken identity, but you're under caution and you have to go back every 6 weeks until they tell you what's up. My mum was sitting there thinking, is my son a criminal? And I couldn't explain to her that, like, definitely not. I do not want to go to jail. But it felt like she was losing me. So she didn't sleep for a week and she didn't eat for a week. And I was like, so when I'm sitting there thinking, that an experience that we had together was her being distant and not engaged, she was probably just sitting there thinking about beans, thinking, I hope my son comes home.
Right. And that's like that's one thing I think I kind of realized. But I think I always said it from a young age, like I realized my parents were their own people. And that was from watching them date other people and like that's realizing like other people are coming into our home. And
what's that like though? Is that weird? Are you rejecting them? Did you like any of them? Some of them I got on really well with. And some of them were like, I always think South Park does a great job of like doing the parent. There's different kinds of divorced parents. There's the one that's like, why won't you love me? The step parent who's like, just take me in as your father. And I'm like, I don't need you as a father figure. I already got a father figure. I'm good. And that person is going through their own thing. And you're like watching a middle-aged man like trying to be your dad. And it's like, I don't need you to be my dad. I need you to be my mum's husband. And some of them were good. Some of them, they smell different to what you're used to, or they look different to what you think your mum would go for. Or they look different to what you think your dad would go for. And that is like, you're like, as a kid and as one of those kids who observed a lot. All kids observe. I know I'm not like, but don't you think you become hyper observant? Your surroundings aren't right. Consistent and stable.
And because I was also an only child, I was that kid who was like very used to hanging out with older people or thought like, I had that demeanor of a kid who was going to hang out with older people. And when, like 40 plus people. And now as an adult, I'd be like, get that kid out of here. Like, what's he doing in the room while we're having a conversation? And I remember Kanye West had a song which never came out. It was called Mama's Boyfriend. But he raps it in front of people and he's like, all right, you, and it's a ethnic slur. Whoever thought I'd be just like you. Wow. And it's like, oh right, yeah, like you realize these are just men going through life who are just trying to get with your mum. Yeah. But he's like, I'm my mama's boyfriend. I'm her little husband. And you realize like that you take on all these different roles as a kid that you just like never would assess. And I realized my wife knows nothing about divorce. She knows nothing about coming from a home that didn't have two parents and didn't have a bunch of other kids in the home with her. So I realized that's like, it's a complete blind spot for a lot of people. They don't realize what it's like to come from a divorced home. And they do the David Cameron of like broken homes, broken people, broken homes. And I'm like, shut up. What the hell is wrong with you?
Broken people, broken homes.
But what I love is David Cameron and those guys have done a really good job of normalizing this idea. And so have so many people where it's like, well, if you come from a divorced home, then there must inherently be something wrong with you. And they've never occurred to them in their life that perhaps their own parents with their own trends who were together also messed them up. But because they come from a home that their parents chose to stay together, somehow they're better or that somehow their childhood was better. I hear it so often. And I just think it's so weird that people think there's this inherent bias against, it's not single parents, but against that setup.
The breaking down of a marriage.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very protected idea, marriage. And I think you almost have to demonize people who aren't successful in it to make it as precious as it is appeared to be.
So I disagree with that. I think because marriage to me has become an intensely personal thing. obviously I look at other people's marriages and I'll love it. I'll cry at a film if there's a man who loses his wife, but I'm not crying because it's his wife. I'm crying because he loved that woman. But it's become so personal to me because I realize my marriage is so specific to me. I'm in a mixed faith marriage. I'm in a mixed ethnicity marriage, all these kind of things. So how can I say that I'm married in the same way as my friend who's married an English woman is? We're not.
But isn't the social expectation of what a marriage is the same? We all have the same external pressures to behave, to perform in a particular way as a husband.
But my wife's expectations are different to what my expectations are. And so I'm not saying that those pressures don't exist. I'm just saying that I don't feel those pressures. I do obviously feel those pressures. I feel that, obviously the pressure to protect my wife or whatever it is. But that doesn't feel like a social pressure. That feels like an inherent marriage. That's something that's... My wife wants me to protect her. Yeah. I'm not protecting her because society told me to protect her.
Yeah, but inherently you spoke about your wife earlier as being a strong, vocal individual. Extremely, like the idea of a docile woman at home waiting for you to return with the daily supper for her to cook is way gone. So what level of protection, like unless you're Liam Neeson and you have a secret world where you're getting kidnapped. And
she's Albanian, so Liam Neeson in particular just offended those people.
That's a great reference. Yeah. I think I did it on purpose because that would make me look smarter.
Right,
but
yeah.
I do think that what level of... Yeah, I think that might be offensive. Yeah. I think what level of protection are you providing?
Financial in the immediate. Obviously, if the door's locked at night, that's like a kind of a...
that helps.
Yeah, but like, what is that? That's like it's a gesture of sorts. It's like a reminder that I'm protecting them. That's probably the most protective I am. Obviously, there's also that. I remember she loved it one time. This is a personal story. This guy like almost ran over her toes, and I like smashed the side of his car and was like, "You get out and apologize." I don't know why. I was probably just high on my own testosterone on that day or something. But I was really angry about it because he did like cut her off and he did almost run over. I smashed the side of the car and he got out and like didn't square up to me, but like walked over in an intimidating fashion. I was like, apologize to you. You almost did this. And he did. I remember being like,
this stuff works. This masculinity stuff.
Yeah. She loved it. Yeah. And I remember just being like, oh, okay. Like, okay. But I didn't need to do it again to prove it. I just don't feel the need. My life becomes more and more personal as I go on. And also, you probably have this as well. Because there is a very open, my job is very openly public, and therefore I go home, it feels a bit more like a switch to me, whereas I think some people don't understand the private public switch.
Yeah.
Because I've also had my privacy and my own life like raked over in such recent years. That's another thing where maybe... I don't want to call it trauma, but it probably was like a trauma, caused me to change my setup or change my like mental whatever. I'm not sure I've quite got it right since, but it definitely...
How did it... What was it before and how has it changed?
It was much more open before and much more... or at least it was much more trusting of the people who were receiving the information. And... after a few events, so like there was one event where a guy took some clips of what I was saying. There were some mean jokes. He took them, but he made them meaner. So like he would like take... So in context, they were sarcastic, semi-mean jokes. But in the context of what I was saying, you could see there was a lighthearted nature to it. It was kind of just ribbing rather than like destroying.
Yeah.
He took them, edited them so tightly that you couldn't see the context in which they came. And then he added his own thoughts to what he thought I was thinking.
Right.
And said, here's what he's thinking when he says this. I'll say I don't really want to give him the win for it. That caused possibly the most trauma that I've ever had in my life in a public sense. We were away on holiday when it all came out and we were in Kosovo. It was our first trip to Kosovo and we couldn't always get signal because there were power outages. And I remember I was trying to like save data. So I turned my phone on and I'd just be getting like, this video got 700,000 views.
Jeez. And
it was just abuse after abuse after abuse after abuse, but all through the framing of what he had said. So and what I had through that was, it was like, cool, I want to apologize to the people that I was making jokes about. but I'm not apologizing for what he said I said.
Yeah.
But because he'd like framed it, it made it hard to apologize because there were so many people who just wanted me to apologize for his framing.
Yeah.
And it became that like Merchant of Venice thing where I was like, cool, you should take your pound of flesh, but you took way more than that.
Yeah.
And that was so difficult. And the video is still up on YouTube now. Like people can go and see it. And I still get abused for it now because people go, oh, you're a terrible person. This happened 3 years ago.
So was this about a person or was this about...
It was about charity. It was a charity live stream.
I remember this. Okay.
And I made some jokes about it, like off the cuff, live stream jokes to a very small audience at the time. And it was like 2,000 people. But it was our audience. So they get it. They're like, Loz just being Loz. You know, it was if you're making jokes with your friends, very loose scenario. And he clipped it up and made it into a bigger thing. And he kind of used that as like a
platform to go
a platform. I remember he called me like a bitch, and he called me the person I was working with at the time. He was like, "Oh, he's carried you, blah blah blah," but it just changed so many people's perception of what was going on, and so many people's.
But how does that feel though? Because if you think about, like we talk about going back to the winning formula part, you got a certificate for saying you're a good person, crossing lines, and then you enter a space of YouTube, and then now people are calling you names.
Yeah.
That's pretty shit though, isn't it?
Really shit. But also because people go to me, why do you reply to comments? Like, you know, I've got a guy who like gets me deals and stuff. He's like, I saw you replying to someone in the comments the other day. Why are you replying? And I was like, because I want the contrarian bit is not to go, that's my view, take it. It's to go, so what do you think? Like, here's what I think. Do you have a sense of that? And people go, oh, you think you know it all, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, I think we should both act a bit. We should have some really deeply held beliefs that we discuss. And then at the end of it, we go, that was a really good conversation. Did you learn anything? That's like half my family's like that. One of my cousins, I could sit with her for hours and we'll throw views around. And it's nothing, we don't sit there and get hurt if the other person disagrees because we know it comes from like a productive, caring space that if on the other side of it I feel like I've said something wrong, I'll go, okay, well maybe that's worth an adjustment. But that is very hard to get to that space, I think, and that's where YouTube's not great.
Online isn't great. I think the online isn't particularly great. I think if you are having that conversation and the audience that you're having it with is large enough and you own it directly, it allows you to say that and they will come to your defense. Yeah. If you're saying it in a relatively small space and then a platform comes and blows it up and creates context for it, that context wins. So I think whoever goes first wins.
So that's part of my I don't like that. And also sometimes the numbers of whoever's gone first is what. So if it's someone with 1 million, that'll always beat the 5,000 people who can defend you and go, oh no, I know what this person's really like. That feels I have a real sense of injustice still around that because I don't like that isn't true. I'll apologize all day if I'm wrong. There's been plenty of times I've been wrong online because guess what? We're all wrong online. But if someone, my biggest thing is I hate being misunderstood or misinterpreted or misframed. For me, it's like the one thing I just cannot stand. And I hate when people do it to other people as well. They characterize someone wrongly. I just think it's the biggest injustice.
But I almost feel like there's almost like a dissociation from what really happens online. And like, because you spent most of your adult life creating content. But like, you almost like don't want to believe that that's it. Like you almost want to change how online works.
100%.
To be able to digest and isn't that a huge ask of yourself to be able to convert how online content is processed? The fact that they can take a video of yours, clip it up, change the music, jump in between every sentence and say, and the thing is I've met him once and he made a joke about short people. So it's impossible for you to counter those things. Why bother?
Fight the good fight. Or like, why, to an extent, I guess you need to attach yourself to a bigger idea of sorts. I really feel like that's like a bigger idea.
Why that one though?
Because I really care about that. I really care about how people exchange ideas and talk to each other. It's always been something I've felt so at home doing. And I really love doing it. And I really love that people can just have those conversations with each other or can genuinely change through talking to each other. I feel like that's been such therapy, such like it soothed me so often in my life, just talking to people and be like challenging or whatever the setup is. I don't know how else we change things. That's why I kind of don't like what's going on. You know, if there's any movement where you just post on your story or you just post on your post and there's, you've said your bit, doesn't feel like it supplements what I'm trying to say or what I'm actually trying to do. It's a process, isn't it? That's that's what I find. I love.
But what? So why are you sacrificing yourself? Like, look, you
got to sacrifice something. I feel like there's got to be an element of sacrifice along the way.
You could go clear. You're a great creator. Yeah, you're a great communicator. You could talk about anything. You could hug the line and win. You could just win. Why go into the mud and figure out this really sensitive, challenging topic with a bunch of eggs and people who don't even show their identity with a view of saving or helping what and whom?
I don't know if it's to save or help. I feel like it's like a micro contribution in a process. Like the best way I could explain it would be someone comments below my video and I comment back and go, I disagree with that. And then they go, well, I've got my view. And I'm like, yeah, but now I'm disagreeing and telling you how that's not true about me or that doesn't feel right or whatever. And that's the way dialogue works. Like I talk to you, oh, you talk to me, I talk to you. And then you go, you've added something to the way I see the world. And then I go, but you've also added something. So online seems to just be like, I hold this view, you hold this view. And never will the two meet. And I love when like more recently, I did a video and afterwards people came back and went, oh, I was wrong. And they like found the comment that I left or they left. And that was like, oh, cool. Like that kind of worked. That's a process, but it takes so long and you have to be so patient with it. It's the patience I think that we don't have online. Like there's times where I'm having a Twitter argument with someone, or I don't do that anymore. And I'd be refreshing like, come on, answer, say something back, you know? Yeah. That was what I wanted.
And when do you just say, do you know what? Because look, you said you got a family and this is a really important part. Like I had a mission about fatherhood. I threw my whole family, including the family I came from, the family I created, into this idea of we're going to tackle this topic. And I was like, actually, we're having this conversation where nobody's had this before in this way. And at first I thought I was really, really helping. And then I got to a point of doing all of this work and I felt like I just dragged my family into it. Rather than serving this like real noble good for society, which I genuinely believed in, I looked back and like the family I came from were like, when you talk about our dad, our friends call us and be like, I had no idea because we share the same dad. So I realized that I was creating things that they either didn't want to talk about, didn't care, had buried, and just wasn't interested in covering again. I had recreated that for them.
Right.
And I look at the family that I created, and now people would look at them and being like, well, what's happening for you? And, you know, digging into what's happening for them and are they okay? And actually they were fine until people were like digging in and focusing. So now I made two spaces that are my safe spaces unsafe.
Do you think it's unsafe to have a public? I don't talk that much about my kids. I don't talk that much. I won't speak about my relationship directly with my own parents that publicly. Just because also I sort of learned the lesson that you learned is it's like, you know, I learned it with my own wife. It's like, oh, she's Muslim. And then people went below her pictures and went, where's the hijab? Or like, oh, look at you in a bikini online. Not very Muslim of you. And it's like, with all due respect, like, even sometimes when people come along and they offer care or support, if I'm honest now, I'm more cynical of that care and support. You know what happened last year, and we've probably not got long enough on the podcast to go through that. I got so much advice during a very difficult period online. I realized how much that advice was just absolutely useless. Not in a sense where I'm throwing it away or discarding someone's valuable opinion. I've got a lot of friends who've got valuable opinions, but a lot of people were just like, oh, just do this. And I was like, have you considered this for a particularly long time? Or like, but they're like, no, but it's an easy decision. And I'm like, for you, because you have no skin in the game. You don't have none of this. And a year later, when a year ago people would tell me, you're doing the wrong thing, you're doing this, you're doing that. Now they're like, oh, I get why you did that. the point of what I'm saying is, I get how there's not one way to converse with people, and there's not one way that you speak. You know, what is coming out my mouth goes along with my body language, goes along with the fact that we're uploading it to YouTube and all those things. They're all like adding to the message of what it is that I'm saying or what it is that's going out there.
So I have a measure of what I call workability, and I have to ask myself, does this work? And I think with the vehicle that I used originally, it didn't work.
Right.
For me, not in the world, it worked. Loads of people had benefit. There was loads of like things that were done, but I think for the life that I want, more so, even more than privacy, I have to be able to protect my ability to provide for my family, and I also have to, you know, measure, am I being understood? If I say a lot of things and at the end of it, someone can clip it up and say, you hate women or you hate this particular group of people, I've lost.
Right.
I've failed in my particular mission in terms of what I wanted to do. And now I'm distracted from even being able to do the good work that I can do.
But so then how do you get better at communicating? So say you don't hate women. This is an example, which we know. But say that something comes across as if you did when you said it. How do you get better at communicating that unless you're practicing, unless you're like taking part in that, unless you're like, you know, you sharpened your blade or whatever you want the analogy to be? I don't know how you would get better at that. And waiting until you feel like you're really good at it leaves you behind or leaves you with no audience to speak to. So what's the point in saying what, you know, obviously there's a point, you could benefit personally from saying something, but you know, if your idea is to reach an audience, why keep your powder dry or whatever the analogy is that I'm using?
I will go back to a vision that I have for the world. And for me, I want men to play a much more active role in their families. And I want them to not have to abandon themselves to do so, including provision and protection. And so my vision is, if I'm not doing that, and if that's not improving, irrespective of how I feel and what I think, it's not working.
Can I ask you a question? Because I know we've got like 2 minutes left or whatever on the podcast. It might be too much.
We're probably going to continue again after that because
it might be too much. At the moment, I have this thing where I look at myself in the mirror and I don't see myself. And I don't mean like I have, you know, some sort of mental health issues or something. I feel very stable, very, very calm. But I don't see... I don't associate necessarily with the man that I look at in the mirror, if that makes sense. That, for a very long time, was something I really struggled with on YouTube. But what I noticed was I don't know, like, I'm just kind of putting this idea out there, put it this way. I looked at myself on screen and I went, I don't like this person. But what I do as soon as I went on screen was become that person again and like play that role to an extent, the people pleasing element of that, all these kind of things. But it's made it harder and harder as I've gone on to like find that person that I know is like, I get a feeling here. I know it's like there. And it's weird because initially people don't, they're like, no, you're like, you know, you said you're a good communicator or whatever it is earlier. I feel like I'm like a 10th of that. And that's not being a martyr or saying any, you know, like feel sorry for me because I can't communicate the way I want to. But I mean, like, that's a really, that's something I see. And as soon as I saw it, I started seeing it in so many other people where they were just playing these roles that they kind of been given and they weren't able to be themselves or like weren't able to realize their full.
So there's a view of like developing a winning formula. The winning formula is something that you develop to navigate a particular time and then you never take it off. Right. And so if I like, so I developed funny to deal with heaviness in my house. So I would be funny in every single space, and that includes in spaces where probably being funny wasn't appropriate.
We have the same issue.
And then you create a sort of unsafety for people because they're like, why are you laughing at me in this moment?
Right.
I need you to be with me as a 40-year-old man. Don't be here as a 8-year-old boy having a laugh. And so that winning formula became disruptive when even I didn't feel like I wanted to be funny, but I felt like that's what was expected. So I created funny in random scenarios. The point where it doesn't work is like, I had to realize that I am a 6'3" black man, heavy build with a beard. But the archetype and representation of me in people's imaginations is something to be fearful of, or sometimes it could be a daddy representation, and sometimes it could be someone. There's so many different versions of it,
Right.
but none of that's happening for me. But standing there, I have meaning with my presence. And so because the two didn't add up, it created chaos for every single personal relationship.
Right.
Because I think I'm just turning up and being like, ha ha ha, isn't this funny, having a great laugh. They're like, this really powerful, influential man is being rude to me, or now he's laughing at me, and now I feel bad. And I'm like, no, I'm not laughing at you. We're just having a laugh, no?
Right.
And so when it doesn't work, you have to destroy it.
But so I'm going through the process of either destroying it, although it was partially, I was really helped by other people who destroyed it enough for me. But then working out like which bits, like not whether I still need which bits, but like, okay, what, because you still need a structure in the time when you don't have anything, if that makes sense.
Well, no, because like, well, firstly, I think that when you pivot, to even be able to do that, you have to be working on this idea of like when Jay-Z killed Jay-Z on his song in 444 album, you have to kill that person that wants to be famous and talks about his wife in a very like, look at my wife way, and we're $1 billion worth and $2 billion worth. And you have to kill all of those ideas over a period of time, but you also have to publicly kill that idea. Like people need to see that it's no longer here.
So I'll say this then. We were talking about my hair earlier. I've not cut my hair for a very long time, and I didn't cut it through the whole period where I was
transitioning.
Yeah. This sounds very like trivial compared to what Jay-Z went through. For me, I think it was like a conscious and subconscious message of it's not that I'm not ready, but I don't feel like I've earned the right to cut my own hair, if that makes sense, and like to change the way that you see me or the world, the royal you. But I'm at the point now where I'm like, cool, let's cut the hair. But I'm a little bit fearful as to what, like, almost like grabbing the next vine or whatever, and being like, okay, let's move on from that. Because you also go, well, what if I lose that audience, or what if I lose my source of income? Do you know what I mean?
But so this is why I say that in some forms, masculinity can be a trap, because you have to provide, and that's the role you take on. If that role comes under threat, the idea of evolving out of it and pivoting feels very, very scary. And there is no safety net for you. If you fail, we just look at you and be like, he failed, he couldn't do it.
Right, but that's even more real. I know we've not got long left. That's even more real to me right now, because online on a daily basis, there are people pointing or stabbing or poking and going, you've already failed. Or you're in, or like, so I was on a podcast the other day and people are like, wow, that guy really let himself go. And I was like,
Have you done?
Have I? But like, not in the way that they think, if that makes sense. So yeah, but not in that same way. And it's because I've disassociated from that previous person that was there, and the experiences that he had, or was the experience he was covering up on camera. So that in itself is like, cool, poke and do all that. Just be a little bit more gentle. I'm not even saying like you have to be gentle if you want to criticize me, but like just be a little bit more understanding about it, because you don't know what was going on in that previous period. There's like that's where I'm at right now. So for me to speak about my own experiences sometimes feels a bit weird, because I often look at other people and I see a lot of them speaking in a very assured fashion, and sometimes I find that good. I don't really want to, at the moment, I don't relate to those kind of people. I don't really want to watch those kind of people. I don't relate to Andrew Tate or Jordan Peterson or any of these people, not in a holistic sense. They're men. That's about where we get to, just about. But what I mean is, like, I kind of want to see people who are like, I don't think what I'm saying is vulnerable. I don't know what the state I'm in is, if that makes sense. It's maybe vulnerable, but I'm not saying therefore I'm weak, if that makes sense.
No, of course, there's no relationship between vulnerable and weak, but to be vulnerable, you have to have a form of psychological safety, as in like where you are won't implode as you go and explore who you are now.
Right, and that's the big one for me, is like there's a load of people who are looking at me and going, oh, could he direct this thing? And I'm worried that if I'm publicly vulnerable or open about that, then they'll go, oh, he can't helm this one.
Yeah. I don't think you have to be publicly vulnerable. I think you have to publicly kill the persona.
So I think that the knife is like drawn back right now and is like ready to like stab in the heart of whatever that was.
Can we do it together?
I'll very happily do it with you. Yeah. Like if you wanted to, yeah. It's also because we're probably going to finish, but I'm also very inwardly self-critical anyway. So I've privately killed myself, like not in a suicidal sense. I've privately killed myself a lot of times. And so when someone else makes a joke about me or makes an observation, I'm not embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed about the observation. I'm embarrassed I haven't kind of addressed it yet. Yeah. Or I've I didn't get around to that. It's like, got to fix that step or whatever it is. That's where I'm embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed because you notice my hair doesn't look good or you notice that I might have put on a bit of weight or whatever. I'm embarrassed because that's not my focus right now. That's not my, my thing. Like, do you want to change it into another analogy? You could be like, rising from the flames, the Phoenix one. I think that's a good one too. Oh, feels a lot less
terrible
brutal than killing.
No, because you have to kill it. Like,
why do you have to kill it?
I did an episode when we did the BBC Sounds episode for Dog Bad Dads. The final episode we did was symbolically killing off your parents. Yeah,
I see. I get that.
Yeah. So it's this idea of like your parents are your mum and dad, and you become an adult, and they're not really your mum and dad as in like the traditional sense. And you build a new relationship with them. You build a relationship that's a lot more equal, on par. In fact, at some points you take care of them because they're a lot older now. And the reason why it has to be violent, because it kind of has to be violent. Like, I don't think transition can happen in a smooth kind of calm way. I think it needs something big to happen, some real work. Like, and then on the other side, you got to practice it and be willing to like let go.
I get the rupture, like the kind of fractious element of it that needs to be there. And maybe to an extent, like just to make it like last in everyone's minds, there needs to be something that leaves a mark in a way.
No, but for you though.
No, but that's what I'm saying. Like even just, so for me, obviously, privately you can go through a lot and people won't know. But if you want to do it publicly, or you have to an extent do it publicly, that is a lot. It's almost a bit harder to do. There's an element of ego in there as well, where it's a bit like, oh, it's not embarrassing.
No, I think fundamentally doing it publicly is a terrible idea. I think that's a mistake that happens. I think when you see people transition in public and they get really like erratic, they're kind of inconsistent in how they communicate, they show up in one way. Like, let's a perfect example, like Justin Bieber, for example. Right. We've watched him grow up from, I don't know how old he was with his first single, 11 or something, whatever, into now being a man in his 30s and married. But you got to see when he had a chimpanzee and he was like punching people in the face and speaking like a rap artist. It was bizarre. You don't want that to happen. No. I think the transition can happen like that at home with your immediate people and that you're exercising who you are now. But I think when we say, how do you communicate that? There's a before person. There's an acknowledgement that person no longer exists. And then there's a fundamental change in behavior. That you can't then rely on the winning formula of old Laurence to get you through the change, because then that's not symbolically killing off that particular type of archetype. Yeah,
and I get that side of it. I guess that there is like an element of not what happens, but like some people, you can be easily triggered into the older patterns sometimes, if that makes sense. Or sometimes it's just very easy to return to those things. Or when you've done the work, but there's a lot of people who, like the work, I couldn't have done so much work to progress as a person. And still there's a YouTube video which thousands of people go back to once a year and go, but this is you. And that is it's a very hard, because it's quite a triggering thought. It's something that makes me quite angry sometimes. I'm like, how can
the fact that information exists?
But like the fact that not only I don't mind, again, like being wrong in public. I don't think that's such an issue. I think that's, I was on plenty of debate shows where I've been very wrong in public. I think it's where people try and go, no, that's you, and they try and box off that version and go, that encompasses you perfectly. That I think is that happens a lot more recently, I think, especially on social media, where people go, no, that's the person that is done. No. And I hate that process. I just think that is it's so dishonest to me.
But you know what it is? I feel like that's almost as if that's something that's connected to I think a part of what you need to do now is say goodbye to that. And in saying goodbye, that no longer becomes a question.
So it no longer becomes a problem.
It's no longer a problem. So if someone presents the old version of you, you're just like, thank you.
Right. And that's something I've become a lot more easier with. So again, I think like maybe it's a gradual process where you're like, that person.
By the way, it took me 4 years. I've intentionally known about the practices, the behaviors that you need to employ to evolve from who you are to who you are now.
Right.
Who you were to who you are now. And it still took me 3.5, almost 4 years to get comfortable in that new space.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I say it is just real work. And so, I realized, I sat with and went through different schools of education and change, and they proposed some really important points to me. And when I applied it to my life, it was clear that my life was not going to work.
Right.
And like I built it based on this almost persona of like what Will Smith was. And I wanted just to be successful, have a beautiful wife and family, and like be smart and be respected. And all I really created was this massive inauthentic persona that was almost like a weight on me. And I wasn't able to move and be authentic to the other parts of myself who weren't Will Smith adjacent.
So that's where I feel like so the word that I often like comes to my head at the moment is plasticity, where it's like that is something that feels very core to me. There's like a real adaptability that I have felt less and less in recent years. And I kind of feel that coming back to an extent. Because it stops you from being that, or not you, but me from feeling authentic. And I felt very inauthentic when I felt boxed off by people. And that felt like when you have people just constantly coming back to you and saying, no, you're that guy who hates Manchester United, or you're that guy who hates charity, or you're that guy who let True Geordie down that time and did all that. That's such a weird thing. I guess what you worry about, I have this image in my mind, I'll describe it and see what you think. When you kill something, very often there's a grave there. Weirdly, my mind's always drawn to what's written on the grave because that really matters to me. And I guess I worry that I don't feel I control what is written on that grave right now of that old version. And I would quite like to be able to, I'd like to carve those words myself or have someone who would carve them for me, and I'd be like, I trust that person to carve. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but isn't that just that's the ego part of you speaking?
For sure, but that ego part still matters to an extent to me. It? I think it does. I'm not saying it matters to the point where it rules everything, but I still think that it has a purpose and it has a I guess the question that pops up for me when you say that is, it does. I want that part of my life to have some purpose.
No, but it absolutely does.
But what I don't want it to do though is to be framed. It's all about framing, I guess, for me. I feel like framing is really important. I don't want it to be framed as, oh, you went through that part of your life because it was really difficult. Because it wasn't exclusively that. That's like a really reductive way of treating people or parts of your life, if that makes sense.
But I'll give you an example. So in how I'm viewing you is that you've been a part of something that in theory has not only been successful from a monetary point of view, you've shifted how YouTube is viewed to the point that broadcasters have just ripped off your creative ideas, your approach, and now everybody has a version of what you've created and you were a part of that. You would like the memory to be that.
Right.
But what I'm saying to you is that I've had a version of that. I built a show. From that show, I think probably about 5 or 6 of them ended up being the biggest talent in that particular vertical. Many of them are multimillionaires. Many of the YouTube creators that we put on the platform that we both work together on have also gone on to be incredibly successful.
Right.
And my name will never directly be like in that. And the part of me is like, I have to accept that is just a part of it. I actually didn't do it for that reason. I didn't do it for the recognition. I did it because I genuinely believed in the people that I was working with.
Right. And I do agree with that. And I definitely relate to that. I never wanted it to be like, I don't want the credit, but what I do kind of want is to be able to transition into the next part of this and use some of I don't want the social credit. I want the career credit that I can then go, I'm not saying like I want to win an Oscar. I want to win any of those things from that period of my life. In the future, who knows? But like, you want to be able to go walk in somewhere and go, no, I did. Well, here's the body of work. Judge me on that. Whereas the past year, has been walking in and people going, he's not associated with that anymore. And it's still going, so it can't really be his thing. And a lot of it has been those kind of, oh, you don't have the numbers in this way you used to. So you can't be as important. You can't be as good at what you used to do.
Well, my invitation would be to execute, because inherently you are doing it. You are still creating. I think I commented on some of the videos I found that you created. You're still doing excellent work. And it's about getting in tune with the context that will amplify it in the same way, so it's seen in the same way. A lot of what you've done still stands toe-to-toe with anything else you've ever done. So you haven't lost your ability to create amazing work. What you've lost is the belief or the anchor to the great work, which allowed you in a context to have a conversation and say, look what I did, now I want to go do more.
Right.
And I think that's a completely separate thing. So killing off that person doesn't kill the reputation that you've built. It actually separates you and says, now it's actually about you. Whatever you build from here is like yours. You never have to share the idea of like, I made this, but the context is this. And actually start feel you have to explain the context and the things around the person that is like, actually, so my work has more value. You just get to enjoy it. And it will happen in its own time. Like what you probably don't realize is a part of my rebirth was coming on Kickoff.
Right.
I've loved football. I've been debating football in playgrounds since I was 12 years old, aggressively. What people don't know is that I originally supported Leeds United because my brother supported Arsenal and he really upset me one time. And I was like, I'm not going to be anything connected to you. So I looked up and down the table. I went through I had the annual book, and I saw Leeds had about 3 or 4 black players. And I was like, I support them. Right. I didn't even realize they had won the league the year before. I support them. So from about 92 to 2003, 4, I supported Leeds. And it was I really supported Arsenal, but I supported Leeds. And it wasn't until I think I celebrated the League Cup final when Arsenal beat Sheffield Wednesday. I broke my mum's lamp because I celebrated the last minute goal. I think it was Andy Linnigan scored. I celebrated Parma when we beat them 1-0 in the Cup Winners' Cup. I was there as a fan, but pretending to be a Leeds fan.
Yeah, right.
And it wasn't until like I came on the show and I was able to exist in a different space that I found a bit of joy. And so that's why I'm so like giving in regards to Brian, and I'm so giving even in regards to you. You know, I needed a place to go and just be, where there was no context of like, oh, you do this thing and you know, it's a platform around fatherhood, and I just needed to stop. So in essence, creating that safe space is a part of the like amazingness of what you did. You supported the careers of people who were on the show who wouldn't have been where they are today. You quietly know this. And I feel like everybody quietly knows it. They just want to know the context of how they need to honor you now.
Right, which is kind of, that's part of the journey, I guess, I've been on over these last couple of months and weeks, and sort of just, just meeting people. Like, I went on a few people's podcasts and they said things which I was never expect. They were like, oh, you on the OGs of YouTube? And I was like, am I that old?
Makes you feel different now.
It makes you feel old,
like,
but
that's
also,
how you see me.
One guy was like, oh, that's Mount Rushmore sitting right there. And I was like,
yeah. My nephew fanned out when he saw you. He was like, oh my God.
Yeah. But like, that's, to me, I just don't want to lean into that, if that makes sense. But also, I look at it, so I'll be honest, I look at it and I go, that's great. I didn't really want to build that. Like, I wanted to build something, and I guess that's where I got to the point where for a while I was like doing my YouTube channel and doing all these other bits, and I realized my skill set was wider than that, but I'd sort of boxed myself off to this little silo of, hey, you just do the football YouTube thing. And everyone was looking at me in that way, or everyone, but you know, and that I realized was a very limiting thing, but it was because I didn't have the confidence or even the energy to put into remembering like that other version. And now there's like, it's a feeling here where it's like, oh, that other person is back. It's a whole other version I couldn't access before. I knew it was still there, but I couldn't reach out and touch it. And I get like little memories from past eras of my life where I'm like, there's that person again. And that's so, you don't know that feeling until it's there. Because you, in your mind, I don't know what it is, you're like blocked off. You know, when they say like the calcified, whatever it is, maybe I was in that area. I was not getting rid of, but like unblocking a lot of the things that I blocked off to try to make it through the previous period of that life. And then a really bad thing happened and more blockers came along. And that like built it up to such a degree that I must have been a terrible husband. I feel like I've at times just been this awful father because it's like my kids, I imagine they look at me and go, well, they're 3 and 1, but you know, they look at you and they don't see you there, if that makes sense. And it's such a weird experience to go through live because you're like in the room, but you're not. You're not really experiencing it. I wouldn't call it depression, but there is like
there's a heaviness.
But you're still operating at actually relatively quite a high level. And you can still walk in a room and go, time to be funny or time to be this. Or mainly because you have to do it for money. But that's a really...
But it's not how you feel.
It's not how you feel. It's not authentic in that sense. And that is a weird experience to go through.
Look, I feel in my version of it, I needed to leave the country. And I spent much of my time in South Africa reestablishing who actually is Marvyn. And the one thing about that is you need space and you need time, you need quietness. And I was fortunate to do like a 10-day silent retreat and have therapy sessions every week, sometimes twice a week when I really, really needed it. And that's a massive privilege. But I think at the same time, what the lessons are is time and space. And you need to, and you've had like almost a year now between where you were before and where you are now. But like that's like getting out of the mud, and then you haven't even chosen who are you now yet. You haven't even got to the point of, you know, creating the best of your work here, and then that's just gonna come, right? And so for me, I think that's daily practices. And so like if you find a couple of things that you just do every day, that's gonna push you forward. You can not almost hide, but you can allow time to push you through a particular part of a challenging time. By just like, I wake up and I do these things. Right. Are there anything that you've actually committed to? Have you signed up to doing anything? Like, how are you getting through and navigating that feeling of disconnect?
My kids are like a big part of it. I love, like, my daughter is just the biggest gift. She's so amazing. And like, I just look at her and I melt. And I've never melted like that in my life with anyone before, even my wife. Like, you know, obviously melted in other ways with her, like how you feel about someone you first fall in love with them. But my daughter in particular, I'm just like, oh, you're amazing. And my son is like a different kind of connection, but still there. But in terms of like me, I think if anything, I'm trying to find the thing I want to reconnect with right now. I don't actually do all that much. And I found myself like sitting on my phone a lot because it was just like an easy distractor and escape. And I realized I was just watching other people live a life rather than me do my own thing. And I was sort of like banking things. I was like, oh, when Laurence comes back, then I'll do that. I'm watching other people take great holidays, and I was like, yeah, when Laurence gets back, then he'll do that. But it felt like a third person experience. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. You're almost like doing downloadable content that you'll like play later in the game. But I kept putting stuff off and putting stuff off and putting stuff off. And that, I don't do that so much now. Now I'm at least trying to engage. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Look,
I'm so ready to kill that. So ready to kill that person. I think
the way to anchor that desire to create a new thing is to have a new vision for life. Like, I feel like the contrarian element has a piece of it which I think is genuinely impactful and has a chance to be powerful. I don't think you can anchor a life on that though.
No, I think the observations you can make as someone who's a contrarian or isn't always there can be very helpful. But it doesn't mean you always have to voice those, and you're learning to like balance the two. And in particular, I think, you know, obviously all of that change comes from being at home. I'm learning that a lot more at home now, where it's like, how do we have conversations around the kids being Muslim and me not, especially a contrarian non-Muslim in the home. That's like a really big influence on them. So you learn very practical lessons just from what you voice and don't, or how you express yourself. That's very informative. But I get what you're saying. What you're saying makes so much sense, because there's more to life than being that thing. I realized I wasn't really maximizing or living whilst living that life. And that's you want to get out that almost as soon as you can when you realize that you're like, shit, like what? And it really like wakes you up in a sense. I know it's a really stereotypical thing to say at that point, but it really changes how you treat the world and everything around it. But also then you start to look yourself in the mirror and you're like, am I really that person? You're like, oh, maybe you do actually look like shit, or like maybe you do need to do something about this or do that.
But the part of you knows that you haven't been at your best though. You know that you're not.
But it doesn't mean there's not good things that haven't been created in this time or that haven't worked with really good people.
If you're talking about the feedback that people gave and says you don't look and feel your best in this, it's like it's really hard to show up in that way. Like it's so funny because I think after my marriage broke down, two of my friends came up to me and was just like, Marvyn, you were dressing bad.
Wow.
For a while. I was like, what? It's like, no, I don't think so.
Right.
And I had to really take a moment and just be like, when you don't feel good about yourself, those things can happen.
100%. Because also you're like reaching out for other identities and stuff. And I realized that I was like, oh, the clothes you're wearing, like even this t-shirt today, I looked at it, I was like, yeah, you need to, not that I don't like the NBA, but I was like, you just don't need to wear that logo on that jersey.
It feels like a free t-shirt that was given to you in a bag and you were like, I like it.
And I was like, yeah, I like it. And now I'm going to wear it. And you know what? The old me would wear it and go, because they might work with me or something.
Yeah.
Whereas
they'll
now
see
I'm
it
like,
and be like, he loves the NBA.
He loves the NBA. And that's weird. And that's like a weird, what a stupid, but also, I realized I was like, I was totally sucked into, but also totally threw myself into being that influencer or being those things. Guess what? It made a load of money and it's really easy and fun.
Yeah.
If you keep the momentum.
Yeah.
But you have to keep the momentum. So when all the momentum went out of it. Right.
Yeah.
But and there was that cost. But when the momentum went out of it, that was when the cost became very obvious.
Yeah.
Whereas before it was more like, if you're getting paid a lot to do a brand deal on your Instagram,
do it.
And you will, because also you, to an extent, you feel guilty. You're like, for that money, that's what my friend makes in a month or 3 months.
I would post this just because you gave it to me.
Exactly. And I was sat there and I was like, actually, I'm never going to get to where I want to get to, which is to be able to question some of these big brands or to be able to question what goes on in the Premier League. Not in a way where I'm like, will Nike sponsor me to this?
It's like,
Right. It's so hypocritical and so, I don't want to criticize other people. Everyone's on their own journey and they can all do whatever they want in that space. I suddenly got a real disdain, not for anyone else, of myself. And I was like, what are you doing? Are you? And that was a realization, which is hard to take because you look at it and go, how long have I been doing that for? Or what am I doing? And also, where else do you get the money from if you're not going to get the money from this source that you knew where it was? And you really reorient what you're looking at.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen on I'm saying these are quite vacuous things to say. They're just consequences of other things that I think and feel.
No, but I think they're not vacuous because they're a part of the machine that allows you to provide and be the fundamental part of who you are, which is like you're a husband, you're a dad. To do that, you must provide an element. You can't provide and protect your family if you're not earning. You've got to use your skill set to do so. My invitation is that pivot starts when you start having a new vision. So you have your foundational way of approaching things, which is what the people that you have relationships, the things you're doing.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
Sorry to cut you off, but it occurred to me. So obviously my thing in my space is like filmmaking or videos or football or all that stuff. I have a real problem inwardly, and I want to know what I feel like your equivalent would be when you did Dope Black Dads. That is built as a brand built around race and identity, I guess. And you were really trying to leverage an authentic sense of being black or being a dad or both as a mix. When you were looking at other people's content who were making a lot of money from being a black dad, but were doing things that you would consider counterintuitive to being a black dad, how did that make you feel?
I'll be honest, there's tons of people who came into interaction with us, looked around, tried to go create their own version of it, or became influencers in their own right. Very much to what you said, I think I'm okay with it.
Yeah?
Because I wasn't even trying to create that. I honestly was just trying to say, please help. Like it was a call to help for myself. I didn't have a strategy, and I'm a strategist, and I still didn't have a strategy. I was reacting in real time as to what was being presented to me, but I didn't try and have a podcast on BBC and with Spotify. I never tried to do brand deals with people. I was just like, can people understand that I think as a black man, my experience seems to not be quite right, and something's wrong here? And when I spoke to white men, South Asian men, East Asian men, they were having an experience of their own, but it wasn't the same as what I was having. So I was just like, I want to gather and understand it. And let's talk about it until it just starts to make sense. So when I see other people doing whatever they're doing, my only thing is I just hope that you're safeguarding your children and your family. You're genuinely protecting your family, because it's not as simple as we create content. It comes at a cost. You have to give a part of yourself up to, and I gave it to blackness in theory. I just gave it away. I didn't question who was I giving it to. Is it really helping people? I was just like, oh, people need my help, so I'm going to help everybody.
Right.
What do you need? And at one point, I just said yes to about 30 things. Of the 30 things, 15 of them I probably had to do myself, which I didn't have the capacity to do. Of the other 15, people are taking my contributions, going around the world and being like, oh, Marvyn said, or Marvyn gave me this. And people were like, well, Marvyn, why did you do that? And I'm like, I didn't even understand the full thing. I was just helping out a friend.
Right.
So I had to like bring everything back into my center, give what I had capacity to give. But really it centered on what is the gifts that I have? What am I actually good at? And what can I sustainably do? And it was so interesting that kickoff happened, radio was happening, TV appearances were happening, and the communication part, the storytelling, the insights, the like sharing of a story was my gifts. That is what inherently everything that will happen now will be built off of my ability to storytell. And it will come out of 100 different ways. But I only storytell if I'm helping. I'm not here to judge anybody. Like, I'm not here to be like anti-white and say, oh, you're racist and attack people with labels. I'm not interested in doing that. I'm interested in actually helping the people who have been marginalized. So I make sure that I have a clear framework as to why I don't do certain things. And sometimes I may have to do without, but I trust that the North Star of like what I am giving will help more people and inherently then help me with protecting my family. But look, I don't think I don't have a red button. If I really felt like this is going to be too damaging, just isn't going to work, I have other skills that are available in the marketplace that I'll just go and do those. I don't need to be a person of note in any way, shape or form to like provide. I just want to, that for me is the number one thing. And I would prefer to do it this way. But if I can't, I just, you know, I have that red button pretty much ready at all times, ready to be pressed.
Which is a good way to walk away from the table if you don't like it.
If the cost is too big, like I won't be mentally impacted ever again helping people. Like I can't do it at the cost of the peace of my family and my children or the safety of myself. It's not noble. It's not a victory in the way that you kind of think it is in the beginning, because what you realize is there's so much hurt people out there, challenged people, dark people sometimes, who have no interest in your worldly purities. So if you don't balance it out with what I call a boundary, you'll just keep giving and they'll just take everything you give and still be like, I didn't give enough. Which is crazy because you've given so much, I've given so much, but it will never ever come round in that way. So I just never request it. I never look for anybody to say thank you or well done, Marvyn, if it weren't for you. So I just get on with what I do because that's all I kind of know.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's still alluring to be a little bit vacuous sometimes, or just play the game though, isn't it? Or also what I find maybe frustrating in my own capacity is people just tell you like, oh, that doesn't really happen like that. And I'm like, what do you mean it doesn't really happen like that? Or people are like, oh, you do YouTube, like you're not going to do TV, or like, but if you do TV, we're just going to patronize you or whatever. And I guess I'm exploring, you know, some people are going to say you're just going through life. That's just what it is. Doesn't stop it being like an interesting experience or like the frustration for me is kind of the sometimes the vacuous stuff can get you to the top, or sometimes like, you know, engaging in that can be have a big payoff. Sometimes that some people can capitalize on that payoff.
Well, I'll answer it in a different way. You will find people who appear to be easily doing this badly. But they're growing, they're making money, they're talking about money in such an absurd term. You're just like, right, well, how are you doing this thing that probably, you know, you honestly can never look. Like you can never get sucked into, because I don't know what the cost of that transaction is for them. I don't know what they had to abandon to be able to stand there and be like, you know what, Pampers, or whatever they had to do to be an influence of that kind. And that's their right. What I do look for though is how they honor me when I communicate with them. Like it's that if they're good people, the thing you do to be that, I don't mind. it's when you become a challenging person to deal with or disrespectful.
Wow, okay.
Then I feel like it's important for me about my interaction with you to correct you. I don't correct you on behalf of the world. I think, you know, the world will do that. The universe is a very powerful force. The universe will universe you. I think for me as a man, if you're disrespectful to me or you violate my values or my space, I will tell you to your face and I'll be, you know, fearless in doing so. That's as deep as I would ever get in with anybody.
Because there's no need to go any further, really.
Because also it's like, if their mission is like, I feel like if you're doing scandalous things, you will protect your right to be scandalous.
But that's part
costs.
of it is, I think, yeah, like I've had a few people in recent interactions kind of, if I felt complicit in what they were doing rather than empowered or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel complicit in that sense. I think our industry relies a lot on people being just complicit.
Yeah, like just come along.
Yeah, like why are you shouting this out? Like don't say anything. We're making serious money off this, and no one seems to have noticed we're making money. So we're just going to keep doing it. I'd rather not interact with that. You know what? I guess in having this conversation, I kind of realized to an extent, in killing yourself or whatever the phrase is, you're also killing some of the relationships you have with some of those people the necessity of those relationships. And that can be a weird one because you're killing friendships or bonds that you have or had.
I'll be honest, I lost 90% of the people that were in my life at that particular time to now. They're not there. And it's not, some of them are there because I had to rip the Band-Aid off.
Sure.
Some of them you evolve in a way that they're not just around you in the same way. But like, I will tell you, if people truly love you, they will find you again. So like, I have not fallen out with anybody. It's like when I establish my boundaries, if you don't like it, you will find a way to be like, this person did. And I'm just like, look, I never fell out with you. And if you ever come back and you are a changed person, or when life hits you the way it's hit me and probably has hit you, you will probably find me because you know I'm the best equipped to help you navigate that particular time, irrespective of how you say you feel or you do feel. And when that happens, I'll take it on that basis. I don't fall out with people because you cannot be that invested in the story that they have about themselves or you, that you have nothing to do with. So I genuinely feel just like timing. And when they reestablish, like, I'm always open to a conversation. And like, if everyone from that time in your life will probably hit you up at some point and have just a really human conversation with no goal of like reestablishing anything other than to be like, thank you for that time. Because what you don't know is that in that time, when I did my first ever kickoff episode, I was sitting there thinking, I'm so nervous. I don't even want to be exposed to the world. I'm kind of like just reestablishing, and I'm standing on a platform with, you know, gets 175,000 views for a clip. And I went to South Africa. I went to wherever I go, someone will be like, I seen you on that.
Yeah.
I love you. And even they're complimenting me. I'm like, you saw me. So like, I've been on TV, I've done so many things, and I've never been stopped globally for a contribution that I've made. So it is a really big, big thing. But like, I genuinely feel that those relationships will repair if they were real relationships. And if they don't, you really can't hold it against those people.
No.
Because, you know, the people that we know about have had heavy experiences, and they're not just doing it, you know, I didn't really want to go explicitly, but like, you know, I having met Brian the first time, I kind of knew who he was the first time, all the way, good and bad. I knew it. I knew what he was strong at. I knew what he couldn't see, but he was such a beautiful person.
Right.
Like, he had such a true, honest belief of what he was trying to create. And whatever has happened, the difficulties and whatever the relationships, he will find his way again, because the North Star is actually in him. That's the only reason why he's been able to create it in the first place.
Yeah, that's something I definitely have an implicit belief in.
Oh no, he will be fine, and he'll find his way of doing it, and it will be whatever it was, but it will be stronger. But what I think everybody has come to realize is that you have to be a leader of your own destiny to some degree. You have to be able to control your own. The things that are going to happen for you, because as you said, you're accountable to an amazing woman and two human beings that you can't sit there and be like, oh, well, hopefully this is going to happen on the strength of somebody else. So I'm looking forward to whatever your journey is going to be.
Right.
And I'll probably be around. I'll pop up, see what's going on. Yeah. Just like, what's going on now? But I think it's incredibly beautiful that like you're speaking about this, because what you don't know is so many people at home have a big experience. They go through a loss or a transition. they don't really have anywhere to go to have these conversations. Most people's friends are rubbish. They want to do banter and they want to talk about, you know, jokes and women and great, all those things. But when real life is happening, those things don't even register. And so the only thing you can do is go into drugs and alcohol and like women as vices. And it's like, look, there's a short countdown and all of those things. So, you know, you saying some of these things will awaken somebody at home and they'll be like, do you know what, actually, let me think about how I approach it.
Yeah, I get that side of it. It's a worthwhile process, I think. But also it's a process I didn't like explicitly enter into. I didn't go, okay, time to do this. And then it was the other day when I was like, yeah, I can cut my hair now. And it just was like, yeah, there it is. But there's so many, there's a lot of religious texts around this as well, where you're like, you know, there's loads of stories in old societies about people with long hair or cutting your hair or explicitly changing your appearance. And what's weird about it is you don't really, I've thought about the allegorical importance of it. But when you're going through it and it's about the painful side, obviously when someone changes their hair, I'm like, cool, nice haircut. You changed that. You don't realize the significance of some of these things for some people. And especially in a media sense. Like I think a lot of people, if I cut my hair, would be like, oh, we can have him on TV now. Or like, oh, yeah. Like Louis Theroux, I might have to, I'm good in 5. Louis Theroux had this thing where he was like, I grew a beard and I wanted to take my glasses off. And the BBC were like, don't do either of those. People know the glasses and you don't have a beard because you're young and innocent. And I was like, interesting. And I think it like transitioned him into the next phase of his life when he had a beard and the glasses were still there, but he like changed his hair a bit and those kind of things. That's an interesting one. Yeah. Especially, by the way, and almost to finish on this in a way, it's interesting when the period of podcaster that we're in now, or the period of like media personality, they almost appear in the finished product side of things. So they appear as if the work has been done. Some of them speak in that way. Some of them appear that way. Some of them do both. It throws me off a little bit sometimes when people speak that way because it can feel a bit inauthentic sometimes. And it makes I think it makes transitioning in the public space harder because the expectation is that you will always remain as a constant. But it's only really your presence that should be the constant. It doesn't even have to be the constant. But you get what I'm saying? Your presence and where you are is the only thing that's really constant.
Well, I would say give the people something that's quality, memorable.
That's all I want to do.
And that would do the work.
That's all I want to do.
Absolutely. A killer album from any artist, or whatever you think about Drake right now, if he makes you the classic album that we've been dying for, you forgive all of the Hotline Blings.
This is what Jay-Z did.
Absolutely. He brought us 444
Honestly.
and I don't remember anything after.
No, genuinely. Or
so it's just like,
some of the stuff before it and some of the stuff.
The verses, just moments and hot moments of high quality that genuinely move people. Everything is forgiven.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. This was this is actually a very, again, Marvyn's group. This sort of speaks to it because there's like, is this, but privately. And, you know, there's more people who are like sitting around and having their own thing and going through their own stuff.
I love that space. It'll be back, but also just, you know, having conversations like this allows us to do the work to more people because I can't sit in a room with 10,000 people, 50,000 people at a time. So this will be, you know, the vehicle for now.
Thank you.